Stop scrolling for 1 second and actually look at your kitchen counter, not from memory. Right now, in your head, picture exactly what's sitting on it. Got it? Now here's the uncomfortable part. Everything you just pictured, the mail, the appliance, the half-used spice jar, none of it is an accident. Every single item on that counter is there because, at some point, your brain made a tiny decision to let it stay and then never made the opposite decision to remove it. Japanese households figured something out that almost nobody in the West has. A kitchen counter isn't neutral. It's either working for you or quietly working against you 24 hours a day, whether you're looking at it or not. Here's the part that should genuinely unsettle you. In a study on visual environments, researchers found that just looking at a cluttered surface for a few seconds before you've even touched anything on it measurably raises cortisol, the stress hormone. Your kitchen might be starting your entire day in mild stress before you've made a single decision on purpose. And here's what makes this almost impossible to notice on your own. Nothing on your counter ever announces itself as a problem. The mail has a reasonable excuse. So does the appliance, the spice jar, the fruit bowl. Each one, individually, is completely defensible. That's exactly why they're still there. Clutter doesn't ask permission to stay. It just accumulates one small, reasonable excuse at a time until you're standing in a kitchen that feels heavier than it should, and you can't point to a single reason why. I'm going to walk you through 9 specific things that almost never appear on a Japanese kitchen counter, why your brain is fighting you right now to keep every one of them, and the actual psychological mechanism behind each. Stay to the end, because the 9th one isn't an object at all. It's the one rule that decides whether the other 8 stay gone or quietly come back within a month. Let's start with the one sitting on almost every counter in the Western world right now. Thing number 1, the mail pile. You know the one. Bills, flyers, a birthday card you haven't opened. Something from the bank you're going to deal with this weekend. It grows in a corner of the counter like it has a right to be there. You keep it because of something researcher Roy Baumeister spent decades studying: decision fatigue. Every unopened envelope is an unmade decision, and your brain, without your permission, keeps a running tally of every one of them all day in the background. In Japan, this pile almost never exists on a counter because of a simple cultural habit. Mail gets opened, sorted, and either actioned or discarded within the hour it arrives. Not because Japanese people are more disciplined, but because they were taught early that an object without an immediate decision is a small tax on the mind paid over and over every time your eyes pass over it. What removing it actually changes is subtler than a tidier counter. It's the absence of that half-second flinch every time you walk past, the tiny, involuntary reminder that something is unfinished. Multiply that flinch by 20 times a day and you start to understand why some kitchens feel heavy and others don't. The rule going forward: mail touches the counter once. It gets opened standing up before you even sit down, and it leaves the counter within the same minute it arrived. Thing number 2, the appliance you use twice. The bread maker, the juicer, the waffle iron you bought during a phase. It sits on the counter because getting rid of it would mean admitting the phase is over, and that admission costs more than the counter space does. This is the endowment effect, first demonstrated by Daniel Kahneman and Richard Thaler. The moment something becomes yours, you overvalue it, sometimes by 2 or 3 times its actual worth to you. You're not keeping the appliance. You're keeping the story of the person who was going to use it every week. A Japanese kitchen treats counter space as sacred, not because of minimalism as an aesthetic, but because of a much older idea, that a home should only hold what earns its place through daily use. If it isn't used weekly, it doesn't live in the open. It lives in a cabinet, or it leaves the house entirely, without ceremony and without guilt attached to the decision. Over a year, this single habit compounds in a way people rarely notice. A counter that only holds what's used weekly never needs a big declutter, because nothing was ever allowed to accumulate in the first place. The people who dread spring cleaning are usually the same people who let objects earn permanent residency by accident. The rule, if you haven't used it in the last 7 days, it goes into storage tonight, not eventually, not this weekend. Thing number 3, the someday spices. The jar of a spice you bought for one recipe 2 years ago, it's still there, mostly full, technically expired, and you keep it because throwing it away feels like admitting you wasted the money. That's the sunk cost fallacy in its purest form. The $4 are already gone whether the jar sits on your counter for one more year or not, but your brain treats keeping it as somehow honoring the loss. In a Japanese kitchen, spices and condiments are kept minimal and current, restocked in small quantities, specifically so nothing sits unused long enough to become a guilt object. The counter reflects what you actually cook this month, not what you hoped to cook 2 years ago. There's something freeing in that distinction. A spice rack full of good intentions isn't a resource. It's a small, recurring reminder of a version of yourself who never quite showed up. The rule: anything you haven't used in 90 days doesn't get a decision anymore. It gets discarded. No negotiation. Thing number 4, the everyday cleaning bottles. Dish soap, hand soap, a spray bottle, sitting out because you use them every day anyway. Reasonable except research on visual clutter, including work out of Princeton's neuroscience lab, shows that multiple competing objects in your visual field don't just look messy. They measurably reduce your ability to focus. Because your visual cortex is processing every item whether you want it to or not. Japanese kitchens almost never show cleaning products in the open. They live under the sink or in a single closed cupboard, refilled into one plain dispenser if they must be visible at all. The logic isn't hiding mess. It's protecting the one sense sight that governs how calm a space feels before you've done anything else in it. The rule: one dispenser, closed storage for everything else, no exceptions for convenience. Thing number 5, the decorative fruit bowl. A bowl of fruit sitting out, half of it slowly softening, kept there because a full fruit bowl signals abundance. A home that's put together. But fruit, bought to be looked at instead of eaten, becomes another quiet source of guilt every time it starts to bruise. This is what researchers call the performance gap. The space between what an object is bought to represent versus what it's actually for. A Japanese kitchen keeps fruit refrigerated or in a closed basket, bought in the quantity that will genuinely be eaten within days, because function is never sacrificed for the appearance of a well-stocked home. Notice, too, who the abundance is actually for. Almost nobody else sees your kitchen counter on a random Tuesday. You're performing for an audience that doesn't exist, and paying for it in wasted fruit and quiet, recurring guilt every time you throw out what's gone soft. The rule: buy what you'll eat in 3 days, store it out of sight, and stop performing abundance for a kitchen that only you walk through. Thing number 6, the duplicate cleaning sprays. 3 half-used bottles of surface cleaner, each bought because the last one wasn't quite right. None of them ever finished. All of them sitting in a row. Psychologist Sheena Iyengar's famous research on choice found something counterintuitive. More options don't make us more satisfied. They make us more anxious and less likely to commit to any single one. Every extra bottle on your counter is a tiny, repeated failure to just pick one and be done. A Japanese household typically keeps 1 general cleaner and 1 specialty product, nothing more, precisely because fewer choices remove the friction of choosing at all. The rule: pick one. Finish it before buying the next. No backups, just in case. Thing number 7, the phone and charging cable. It sits there, screen up, buzzing intermittently, cable trailing across the counter like it belongs to the room instead of to you for 5 minutes at a time. Productivity researcher Sophie Leroy calls this attention residue. Even when you walk away from your phone, part of your attention stays behind, tethered to whatever might be waiting on the screen. A charging phone on your kitchen counter isn't just an object. It's an open loop your brain never fully closes. In most Japanese homes, phones charge in a bedroom or entryway, never in the kitchen, because the kitchen is treated as a space reserved for one task at a time: eating or preparing to eat, not for background attention to everything else in your life. Once the phone leaves the counter, something small but real happens. The kitchen becomes the only room in your home where nothing is asking for your attention. That's rarer than it sounds, and your nervous system notices the difference within the first few mornings, even if you can't immediately explain why. The rule: charge it in another room. The kitchen gets your full attention or none of it. Thing number 8, the just-in-case utensil jar. A crowded jar of spatulas, whisks, and tongs, most of them duplicates, several of them never used, kept because throwing away a working object feels wasteful even when you own 3 others exactly like it. This connects to something called the mere ownership effect. Simply owning multiples of the same tool makes each one feel individually necessary, even when logically only one is. It's not really about the spatula. It's about the discomfort of letting go of something that still technically works. A Japanese kitchen typically holds one of each essential tool, stored upright in a single small container, chosen deliberately rather than accumulated accidentally over a decade of moves and gifts and impulse buys. There's a quiet confidence in owning exactly one of something and trusting it completely. It removes a decision that most people don't even realize they're making dozens of times a week. Which spatula, which whisk, which one is actually clean? One tool, one answer, every time. The rule: one of each tool. The duplicates go today, even the ones that still work fine, especially the ones still wrapped in the box they came in. Thing number 9, the empty space itself. Here is the one thing that isn't a thing at all, and it's the reason the other 8 actually stay gone. Most people, after a big declutter, watch their counter slowly refill within a month. New mail lands. A new appliance appears. The jar count creeps back up. Not because they failed, but because they never designated the empty space itself as something to protect. This is the behavior researcher Charles Duhigg describes as a habit loop needing a fixed cue, and in a Japanese kitchen, the cue is the counter itself. One section, sometimes the entire surface, is treated as permanently, intentionally empty. Nothing is allowed to rest there overnight, ever, as a rule rather than a mood. It isn't cleaned once and hoped for. It's protected daily, the same way you'd protect a locked door. That empty space isn't absence. It's the 9th thing on this list, and it's the only one that makes the other 8 permanent instead of temporary. Picture your counter one more time, the way you did at the very start of this video. Now picture it with just one thing missing. Not all 9, just one. That single gap is enough for your brain to register the difference before you've consciously noticed why the room feels lighter. This was never really about owning less. It's about deciding one time what your counter is actually for, so your mornings stop being a negotiation before they've even begun. A clear counter isn't the goal. It's just what's left over once you stop deferring decisions you already know the answer to. Every item on this list was never really about the object itself. It was about a decision you'd been postponing, disguised as something small enough to ignore. You don't need to remove all 9 tonight. You need to remove one. The second gets easier once the first is gone because you'll finally have proof that the counter can hold empty space without anything bad happening. So look at your counter right now. Which one of these 9 is sitting there today? Tell me in the comments and tell me which one you're removing tonight, not eventually.